first panelist is Dr. Richard Soley. As chairman and CEO of OMG, Richard is responsible for the vision and direction of the world's largest consortium of its type. And he's also executive director of Cloud Standards Customer Council, helping end users transition to cloud computing, direct requirements and priorities for cloud standards. And ISC was formed to accelerate development, adoption, and widespread use of interconnected machines and devices, intelligent analytics, and people at work. So please, a huge round of applause for Richard. Our next panelist is Stephen Day. Stephen leads the Innovation Factory, an established consulting and connected expert regional practice that advises enterprises on organizational and process changes for delivering business and digital transformation outcomes backed by current analytics research and machine learning insights. I hope I got that right. Our final panelist for today is Willson Deng. He's an industrial engineer by trade, and he has implemented improvement projects in manufacturing industries, ranging from aeronautics to smart meters, wineries, gourmet chocolates, pharmaceuticals, and glass production. And he founded Arcstone in 2013. And he's also put together a group of like-minded companies into this organization called Simco. So let's welcome our final panelist, Willson. Hello. So we have some extra space, maybe later for... yeah. Okay. So let's start the discussion, and I would like to start with you, Richard. I mean, you travel, and we just talked about how many nights you spend in hotels throughout the year. You crisscross the world. You see, all these developments which are happening in the industrial Internet of Things. So maybe let me start with you to really understand, what are some of the developments that you see around the world? There are different countries doing different things. Germany is doing something, you see other things happening in the US. So maybe if you can give us a global perspective of where we are in terms of IoT, what are some of the recent developments that you see?
So a couple of interesting trends. First, we're starting to see regional efforts all over the world that are attempting to use IoT as a building block to increase the adoption, by increasing the adoption of IoT, increasing the efficiency of local industries. So for example, as you mentioned, the platform industry 4.0 in Germany, but also the Industrie du Futur in France. There are efforts in China, in Japan, in Spain, and in Kazakhstan, in Chile, all over the world. What's the problem with their focus is, not so much problem. The issue for us is our issue is how to accelerate adoption of IoT for industries. Healthcare, finance, telecommunications, manufacturing, production, and so forth. And the focus of these regional efforts is, of course, to increase economic productivity in some region or in a national region. And unfortunately, they're all rapidly creating their own standard architectures and security frameworks and connectivity frameworks and so forth. So a major effort that the Industrial Internet Consortium is involved in now is working with as many of these regional efforts as we can worldwide. Not necessarily to replace any of the technical work that they're doing, but to ensure that it's aligned with what we're doing. Because if you have to build your applications and your operational systems, your manufacturing systems for both some regional solution like Platform Industry 4.0 and for an international solution like the architecture framework of the Industrial Internet Consortium, you've just doubled your cost for no reason. So we think it's very important to work with all of those, and we're in the midst of doing that in India and in China and in Japan and Germany and several other countries. I think the other interesting trend that's worth mentioning, other than the fact that this chair is really uncomfortable, is what I see in developing countries. There's a real trend in developing countries that see the opportunity to use IoT as a way to leapfrog technology, a strategy to leapfrog technology generations. So you're starting to see that in parts of Southeast Asia, but also in South America, in Africa, and a few other places. It's quite a fascinating trend.
And do you see a lot of actual implementations happening on the ground, or in all of these countries that you mentioned, or?
So interestingly enough, the applications that people talk about, the use cases they talk about, are almost all consumer applications. Smart refrigerators, smart toothbrushes. Seriously. I think it's a dumb idea, smart toothbrushes, smart light bulbs, things like that. But the real value for IoT comes from what the topic of this panel is, industrial IoT. So it's IoT in manufacturing and production, IoT in population healthcare, IoT in smart cities, or as you call it here in Singapore, smart nation. That's where the real value is, that's where the margins are, that's where the money's going to be made. And there I can point you at the very least to our own test beds. A manufacturing test bed run by Bosch, Tech Mahindra, SAP, and National Instruments in Berlin. A smart energy microgrid in Southern California, managed primarily by Real-Time Innovations. A water management solution for the city of Mysore by Infosys. A smart cities application managed by Dell in Southern Ireland, and so forth. We have about 27 of these test beds running now worldwide.
So let me go to you, Willson, because you have been implementing some of these IoT solutions here in Southeast Asia. So maybe you can give a perspective of some real implementations that you have seen, or maybe your organization has implemented, especially in the industrial space.
Yeah, so it's great that we focus more so on industrial IoT, because again, going back to the smart toothbrush and smart toilet, I don't think that's going to have that much actual value. But regardless, when we look at the industrial settings, this is where we're kind of seeing where, especially when we're talking about leapfrogging, is that it allows for very traditional industries that have been running very traditional machines that may have been even pre-war, that still work fine, but you're not going to go and make another $2, $5, $10 million investment in new equipment, but you want to sensorize them. Can we get better value and digitize the operations as close as possible so that I can get tighter control over these machines? So for example, we have customers in Indonesia that are manufacturing very good quality, heavy-duty power cables and power lines to transmit the power from the power plants all the way eventually to your home. Now these are running on very old stranding breakdown machines that are operating for many, many, many years. And again, it's not that there's something wrong with the machines, it just needs to be better monitored, better controlled. Can I calculate efficiency better? Can I know when it's about to break down? And when you start deploying IoT sensors to these things, vibration sensors, moisture sensors, infrared sensors, light detectors, audio detectors, that come in fantastic solutions now. So for instance, this particular customer we launched with is actually using Bosch's XTK devices, which are fantastic, cost-effective devices that you can roll out now, where it has once been something that the only option for them to improve for this customer was, oh, I think we're going to have to spend $10 million on new equipment. Now it becomes a decision of, well, hey, I can gain a lot of efficiency and value from a $300 device. And that completely changes the game of how you not only utilize equipment and resources that you have now, but directly impacts the bottom line. And I think when you look at industrial IoT, that's the biggest component. These are the types of projects that Arcstone and Simco members that are out there in the hardware space and the software space go out and deploy. So maybe we won't have something as interesting as a smart toothbrush, but these are the ones that provide tremendous savings and tremendous value simply on a cheap and economical device. And that's where we see a lot of IoT and industrial IoT moving, is to provide these efficiencies that make sense, that solve a particular problem, to reduce the need to make massive financial investments.
Okay, and one of the countries that you mentioned was Indonesia during our conversation. I was a little bit surprised because, given the Southeast Asia region, I mean, we tend to believe that, Thailand or Malaysia or Singapore would typically be taking the lead in industrial IoT applications. So maybe can you give some idea about what's happening in Indonesia, just for the benefit of.
When we talk about industrial IoT, one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that in Singapore, we take, everyone that's here half falling asleep with their phone on is taking for granted that you have very good access, internet access, and your networks are fine, infrastructure is fantastic. But when you move into Indonesia and these other areas, IoT and industrial IoT isn't used in that pure sense of it's direct to the cloud, it's 100% reliable, because internet is questionable, and even power supply is questionable at certain stages. So what you're looking at right now is you're seeing companies, and especially the second generation ones that are coming in, because a lot of manufacturing in Southeast Asia tends to be family owned. And what you have, this movement is that the second generation that's coming in sees the opportunity and understands and have been exposed to a lot of this Industry 4.0 kind of discussions. They've either heard from it from Singapore. Singapore, again, is still going to be the epicenter, I think, in terms of this generation of ideas about why IoT, industrial IoT is important, why Industry 4.0 is critical. There's a lot of investment and a lot of talent that sits in Singapore. But you have these regional players that come in and look and observe and say, well, why can't we make this a reality elsewhere? And so they have a lot more of a push in terms of how do we improve? How do we bring in new technology? And what's great about industrial IoT is it is cost effective for us to bring in. Even if we don't plan to stream it directly to the cloud, we can at least start streaming some of these things with the right standards that's set up and ready for when the infrastructure is there, that we can then have a full enterprise-wide solution set that we can deploy. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of this is because of this transition from family-owned business down to the next generation, the second generation, or the third generation. And they see that traditional ways of operating businesses, which should be a very big wake-up call for Singapore itself, is that they've already seen the need, even in low-cost countries, to move in this direction. So when you compact that with what's happening in Singapore, Singapore better move that much faster with regards to adoption of new ideas and new technologies and trialing new ideas and new technologies. Doesn't mean you have to go and spend $10 million. Begin the concept of starting small projects in this area to get your people familiar with it.
Thanks, William. One of the things that, while we were discussing in the panel was, this whole thing about IoT and implementation is really going to transform a lot of business models in the way, companies are going to operate in the future, right? And Stephen, you work a lot with startups. And can you give some perspective of what exactly we mean by saying that, it's going to change the way that we deliver service, is going to completely transform business models? These are big words, right? But can you give some real examples of how this is happening, or, maybe you're implementing some of them as part of your, whole work that you're doing?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to see how many people have a smart refrigerator. Yeah, no. So no refrigerator, probably no toothbrush either, right? Well, actually, the first refrigerator I saw, which was one of 10 in the world, was in the year 2000. And it was in an iHome, which was down in Sydney, in Australia. The promise has been there for 17 years, and I still can't see the use of that. But going back to business models, I think from what I can see, there's really nothing drastically innovative about some of the business models. There's a lot of, there's more of a move between the existing business models of paying for capital. And that capital has gone to an OPEX model, from an OPEX model to a subscription model. And so as a service is becoming a little bit more of the norm that I see. With good infrastructure, cloud-based, that can accelerate. But I think it's interesting in certain areas of Asia where that infrastructure is not available. It's going to be an issue that if you don't have that infrastructure, you can't move to a newer business model. So I think it's not necessarily new innovation. It's actually more of a drift towards as a service, and perhaps also on usage-based payment. And Richard, we were talking about the area of GE and basically engine hours being paid for rather than the physical engines. I know in one of the other use cases has been around generating electricity, where the actual supplier generates the electricity, And the electricity company actually buys the electricity off that supplier. And part of the contract is to reduce cost over the years of a contract. So these are all variations of already existing business models, but the technology is enabling billing, enabling the way of operating to actually move towards a different way. I also think from a business model point of view as well, there's a lot of outsourcing that has gone on in the manufacturing industry, and that has tended to lead towards also more of a gig economy as well. And I think we will see some business modeling coming around a little bit more fracturing of the value chain, where in fact you get gig economy workers who are experts and in short supply in some of these areas, ending up working for multiple companies, not actually being employed by them. So I think there's a different aspect to not just the way that you get revenue, but also your cost base and how that's going to go across the value chain. Yeah, yeah. So that's my view of.
And do you see some interesting examples here in this region in Singapore?
Yeah, I mean, I think I started working with startups probably about 7 years ago. I was previously with Cisco, and we were looking at the innovation ecosystem. And just recently I've been working with a startup here around the transportation and logistics industry. And very, very important for Singapore. It's about 7% of the GDP of Singapore is around shipping and the allied services associated with that. And there are some quite innovative uses of sensor technology, but also being in the global trade, having the ability now to leverage cloud, leverage GPS, leverage other areas of technology to better move towards a common view of optimization and also for safety as well. And I think there's other aspects, not just revenue, cost and risk, but safety of personnel and different ways of living your life. And that feeds into the gig economy as well.
Thanks, Steve. Richard, I'll come back to you. You mentioned test beds, right, for the ISA. I'm very interested, and maybe people here would also like to know what exactly happens in some of these test beds that you have. Can you give some more insight into how you're helping?
I don't know about insight, but I can give you exactly some of these test beds.
Tell me exactly what you do.
The first test bed started 2 years ago, originally run by Bosch and Tech Mahindra in a Bosch manufacturing site, Bosch Rexroth manufacturing site in southwestern Germany, a town called Homburg, not Hamburg. And they had a very simple idea for the test bed, and that is, if you could track every person, every tool, every part, and every work in progress within about a meter resolution on a factory floor, you could do a better job optimizing use of the floor. You could ensure that tools are being used more safely because you know where they are and who's holding them, that they're being used correctly, that they're not being taken out of a place where they'll be dangerous, and that people are not wandering too close to the robots where they could get hurt. So I don't know how many of you have seen a manufacturing floor, but usually robots on factory floors where there are a lot of people are in cages so that they don't hurt people. But you can actually do better than that if you're tracking the people, tracking the positions of the robot arms and so forth. So that's what they did, using Cisco routers to do 1 meter resolution inside the factory in 3 dimensions. They knew where the people were, where the parts were, where the work in progress was, and where the tools were. And they could do things like stop the drill when it reached the proper torque, or warn the user that they have not been trained to use that particular tool and offer them training on the fly, or warn a user not to take a tool out of a place where it would be unsafe, a geofenced place. So they now have 2 years of collected data. They're moving into a new version of their test bed in which resolution in certain parts of the factory floor is down to 5 centimeters. So they know literally which bolt is being put into which hole in the work in progress. So that's a great example in manufacturing and production, which is probably the number one use of industrial IoT today. But we also have a smart cities project, which I like to talk about in Southern Ireland. I think we were talking about it before. So the health information of citizens of the Republic of Ireland are kept in the national infrastructure, national data storage of the Republic of Ireland. But the ambulances are run by the provinces, which are called counties in Ireland. We have a project in County Cork in the south of Ireland which connects those infrastructures. And then there are a bunch of tests that run on top of that infrastructure. The most interesting is one that actually connects the ambulance service with the National Health Service. So when an ambulance is on its way to your home, if they know where it's going, if it's not a car crash, for example, they can download your healthcare data and know, and they, in the ambulance, know before the ambulance has arrived if you've got diabetes or if you've got Alzheimer's disease or something like that, and they can treat you better. More importantly, on the way back to the hospital, the treatment that the paramedics have done in the ambulance are uploaded to the hospital and to the National Health Records. And on arrival, instead of having the usual chaos, I don't know how many of you have ever seen an emergency room, but it's chaos. Instead of having that chaos, that information has already made it back to the hospital and people's lives are saved. But there are also water management projects in Mysore, and there are, we're talking about a new mining project in the largest copper mining country in the world. So it's really all over the map. The reality is that's where the money is industrial IoT, as Willson has said as well. I call it the Willie Sutton reason. How many of you have ever heard of Willie Sutton? Nobody. Okay, so I have time for a joke. Now, Willie Sutton was a bank robber in the 1930s in the western United States, and he became a figure of notoriety, but also a figure of fame among the people. And when he was finally caught, everybody wanted to know why he did what he did. So imagine him coming from his arraignment out of the courthouse, covered in chains, surrounded by policemen, federal marshals, and them surrounded by the press, and the press are yelling out questions. And Willie's ignoring them until one person asks him the key question, which is, Willie, why do you rob banks? Willie Sutton stops, the chains stop clanking, the federal marshals stop around him, all of the press stop and aim their microphones at him, and he says, because that's where the money is. Thank you. You have a good sense of humor. My point is, there's money to be made in consumer IoT, but nothing like in industry. In industrial applications like manufacturing, like even smart cities, they have not even started to use internet technology. I mean, it's amazing. I started my career in 1978 working with programmable controllers. Anybody know what a PLC is, programmable logic controller? I was 4 years old. I was very promiscuous. No, it's a different word. Those devices, although they had, it was a Gould device, a Modicon 584, had a 68,000 chip in it, Motorola 68,000 chip in it, but it didn't have a connector to connect to the other computers in the factory. Well, even today, 30 years later, 35 years later, almost 40 years later, they do have connectors, but they don't speak internet protocol. Can you imagine an industry where your devices don't speak TCP/IP, internet protocol, can't be connected to the other information sources and syncs in the factory? But that's the reality that exists today.
And probably that's the reason why I keep on asking everybody on the panel, share some real, examples of how the industrial Internet of Things is actually taking shape within different industries. So let me pause for a minute and see if there are any questions. I don't know how this technology works.
The questions will show up here, but there aren't
Yeah,
any
but
yet.
somebody has to launch it from there. Are there any questions that are already here?
Yes. What is your advice for entrepreneurs for success in an IoT startup?
Oh, this is maybe both of them. So let us take this question. What is your advice for entrepreneurs to succeed in IoT startups?
Do you want me to take that one first? Willson?
I think you're seeing a broader level.
Well, I've sort of acted as a little bit of an entrepreneur and startup myself, and starting up business is, you need a lot of resilience, I think, is one of the words for it from a personal point of view. But I think what I'm seeing is that, probably over the last 4 years, join a community. The communities that are here in Singapore, there's so many, there's practically a meeting every night. You can turn yourself into an alcoholic if you don't watch it, with free beer and food associated with these. Well, there you go. Right. So from an entrepreneur point of view, IoT is really about an ecosystem. And the only way that I've seen the ideas flow better, the capabilities of the startup, both in terms of people, process, and technologies, accelerate to stay in time with the market is that they need to cooperate, collaborate with other folks around here. And I think one of the things that I've been very, very sort of happy to see is the support by the government, academia, in actually making a lot of this quite easy. In fact, I'd argue for an entrepreneur or a startup, if you're in Silicon Valley, it's almost too easy in terms of some of the funding. And so the risk levels, perhaps not, you need to have risk to actually get the adrenaline going and move forward. So one of the advice would be to join that community, contribute, as well as take out. And that leads a lot on to also take a look at the scaling of your business and how you're going to do that. And that's a way of scaling as well through community. Network like mad, understand what other options are out there, and if possible, definitely from our point of view, use open source to fail fast, but also to be in a position to scale and connect to others a lot faster as well.
I actually started my career after that the little sidelight with PLCs. Started my career, did 5 startups, and since 1989 have been involved in about 30 startups in an advisory role as an investor or on the board. And I'll tell you the most important thing, it has nothing to do with IoT, is be ready to answer the question, what do you do with we're just like X except Y? And I have said this more times than you can shake a stick at. It's the normal answer that you hear from people that are entrepreneurs just starting out is that there's nothing like it on the market. As an investor, my answer to that is, it was really nice to meet you. I have to leave now. Because it's extremely expensive to create a market. But if you can say, we are just like X, but Y. We're just like Facebook, but it's faster. But it has no ads. We're just like Twitter, but there's no President Trump involved. The ability to that would be really good, actually. It would just mask him automatically. How did we get into politics? Oh, it was me. I think it's really important to be able to explain how you're different by saying what you're like. In IoT specifically, go start a company that does an IoT platform, because there are no competitors in that space except for trivial companies like BTC, General Electric, Siemens, and Bosch.
And maybe I can also get Willson. Is that why you came to Singapore? Because
Actually,
as you said, it's the easiest place to...
Singapore is one of the most fantastic locations to start up and launch a business. This is speaking from someone who's been slaving it away at it for about 4 years. So I can give you a little bit more of a perspective, at least from this angle. But to the advice of the other panelists here, I think one of the key things is, please, go and network. Especially when you're looking at the industrial IoT device kind of ecosystem, is there is no such concept as you being able to do it alone. This is a very large group of people who have different ideas and different solutions, and don't be cocky about your solutions. You can't solve everything, right? Even the big players, the GE, the Siemens, can't solve everything. That's why there's space for you to even come and talk and start your thing, right? So that's step one. The step two is really to look at what is it that you're actually trying to do, right? Let's not go into the whole, let's start up for the heck of just starting something up, but what is the use case? What is the solution? I think the world has enough of the smart toothbrushes. What are you providing, right? So when you're speaking about industrial IoT, there is so much availability and so much support from the Singaporean government and the ecosystem here to lift your ideas and be a true test bed. So I'll give you some examples of this. So instead of me just like waving my hand around. So the smart nation concept that Singapore is pushing on is, one, there's talent that you can reach out to, people that you can talk to. government agencies that have a good understanding and breadth of the problems that are being faced within the ecosystem here, within the utilities here that are run, to the infrastructure that needs to be kept, to the individual companies such as the manufacturing space, the healthcare space. They know what the problems usually are because they're out there meeting with these groups all the time. Engage them, find the grants, find people to talk to, learn what the problem is, then think about starting a company. Don't just go and start a company for the heck of it. So that's number one. Number two is look at the research industry, kind of agencies that are around. Singapore has always been extremely strong in putting money, effort, and throwing their weight behind agencies such as, again, I have to focus on the manufacturing side since this is where I come from, is look under A-STAR and you'll see SIMTech, you'll see ARTC, the Advanced Remanufacturing Technology Center. These are fantastic test beds with some of the world's most expensive equipment that you can possibly imagine, waiting to be used, to be tested, to be trialed for solution sets that may be coming up from out of Singapore. But it seems that not many people know about it. They don't utilize it. So this is where the networking helps. Go out and find out where these resources are and use them. But at the end of the day, make sure you have the use case. So the networks, as you see from SIMCO, the Singapore Manufacturing Consortium, was founded exactly for this purpose. It was a nonprofit way of making sure that we can gather together a group of like-minded individuals and companies and associations that are keen on moving manufacturing forward. How do we integrate and provide solution sets that address real-world problems? Right? So if you have that kind of mindset and thinking, I'm a solutions provider, IoT is just a tool. We always have to realize that. That's not going to be the end-all, be-all. It's a tool set to solve a particular problem, bring about something. And if you look at IoT, the something has to either be a productivity improvement, a quality improvement, or an efficiency gain. If it doesn't achieve that, then don't waste your time. Right? It's extremely practical in the sense. So in the sense, it's also very predictable. Right? One of the great kind of discussions that are coming out in the test beds that you're mentioning about what's happening at Bosch, that's a prime example of what true Industry 4.0 and industrial IoT devices can reach. Right? But there's so much space in between that even I'm sure that facility is still missing things. This is where the opportunities are. So for companies or for individuals who are keen on thinking about starting up something, find out what that thing is missing first. But seriously, for the love of God, don't just jump in and say, I'm just going to start a company for the heck of it.
Thanks. So before I move to any other question from here, there's one thing which I really want to touch base with you. It's all about standards. There's so much of, I don't know whether it is real or not, but of course from the past we have that experience that, standards have really been a big issue in terms of advancing a lot of technologies, right? Do you think we are doing the right thing for the industrial Internet of Things? Are we ahead of the game in terms of creating the standards that, which are open, which everybody can join in? Can you give a perspective around that as well?
Yeah, I have a little perspective around that. We have 6,000 people developing standards all over the world, in 47 countries, I think it is at the moment. So I know a little bit about standards. I've been doing it for about 30 years. And I'm hoping to understand it someday. I do understand one thing. That's the great thing about standards. There's so many to choose from. Nobody laughed. Okay, you laughed. That's good. The point is, standards and security, by the way, are both bogeymen. That is, people say, it won't catch on, the technology won't work unless there are standards, unless there's security. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you, that's not true. I was going to use a bad word, sorry, but we'll let Willson use the bad words. The reality is, if we never solve the security issue, people will ship product anyway, and it will just cause havoc all over the world. If there are no standards, the industry will move more slowly because adoption will be more difficult because, as you said, Satish, it's really it's a team sport. The whole point is making things work across boundaries, and that requires standards. But, and it's a big but, developing standards when you don't know specifically what the requirements are is a waste of time. Those kind of standards are not worth the paper they're written on or the bits they're stored on. You really have to develop standards once you know what standards you need. And how do you find out what standards you need? You build test beds. And you find out this would have been easier if we had a standard. So I'll give you a very specific example. Bosch is not only a large manufacturer, but they're a large manufacturer of manufacturing tools. They have a subsidiary called Rexroth that makes tools for manufacturing. They're not the only one, it turns out. There are quite a few others with names like Make It and Snap-on and so forth. They need to be able to manage all of the tools on the factory floor, not just their own tools. So there need to be standards for talking to those intelligent tools. Those standards are what we call semantic standards, and that happens to be the expertise of what OMG does, an object management group. That is to capture the semantics of things that do the same thing but have different orders, commands, ways of telling them what to do. And the point is, if you can figure out the union of operations that tools have, then you can map that to the specific APIs, languages, protocols, and so forth for how those tools are managed. And that's what, in fact, we are doing in the device, what we call device management space. So there will be standards, and there is good news in security as well. We published a security framework last September, which really gives you a good feel for how to secure an IoT system. By the way, trick number one, don't think that you're just going to cut it off from the world, because that never works. And trick number two, firewalls aren't enough. You need to have security in depth and actually need to see what data is moving around inside the factory. But the reality is the industry is going to move forward even if those problems aren't solved. So it's really important to address them now, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Okay, thanks. I think that's a very interesting perspective, because every event or every conference that I go to, there's so much of things that are said around standards as how they're going to stall the overall implementation of IoT. So I think you have a very clear perspective on that.
Yeah, most of the standards that exist today in industrial IoT are all in the middleware space, very low level, how to move bits from here to there. And that's easy. I mean, well, it may not be easy, but it's been done for many years. In fact, OMG's first standard was in the middleware space. We invented the middleware space in 1989. And that problem may not be easy, but it's solved. The hard part is once you get the bits from here to there, what do they mean? That's the semantics, and it's much harder.
So there's one more question which has got 4 votes. How can we apply IoT to office workspace apart from industrial applications? Anybody on the panel?
Well, let me try this one. Actually, strangely enough, I've been involved with an organization or a community, as I mentioned last time, called Proteotype. And we're looking at actually office workspace applications for IoT. And in fact, walking around the exhibition, I've seen a smart chair that actually understands if you're actually sitting on it, so for location-based capabilities. There's IoT in terms of the actual building management. There's IoT in terms of collecting data from who's there, where they're going to, what the flow is. So there's a lot of data, and I guess really from my point of view, IoT is about data that adds the intelligence into the actual sensor and infrastructure network. That can be used to do some reasonably innovative aspects to not just the technology, but actually, if you're talking about workspaces are the interaction between you as a human and the environment around you. And the environment around you is now starting to become embedded with sensors and has the capability to actually feed back to you personally on your mobile phone, perhaps where other people are using Wayfinder. That'll make me go bust, so I'm not playing you at poker again. But situation is, I think there's a lot of perspectives really on the human aspect of IoT, which I think we need to explore a little more in depth. And I think that goes to my point around the likes of the way that people are going to be working. I heard yesterday on a panel which resonated with me, and it's something we've been talking about the fact that when you go to work, will you be going to a factory? Will you be going to a co-working space? Will you be staying at home? Or will you be sitting in the airport lounge? Actually, you'll be working in all of those spaces. And so workspace now is not a place you do necessarily a dedicated amount of work. It's actually needs to be a bit more flexible environment that allows you to be productive, necessarily when you're away in these areas. So let me just summarize on then. So I think there's a lot being done on building management, but I think workspace management is slightly different. It's the interaction between humans and their surroundings, and that's where I would say is the opportunity for IoT. To take the sensors, take the data, feed that back to the people, not the building, but the people, and then drive decisions and actions from that.
Another question I have, maybe Willson, you can try to answer that, is this whole thing about IoT will need a lot of skill and capability development for implementation, for use, both from the people who want to implement these solutions as well as the users. So do you think we are creating that kind of environment either in Singapore or in the region where you're seeing that kind of skill development happening? Do you face challenges in getting these kind of people?
Well, Arcstone itself, and I think, and this is not just an issue within Singapore, it's just there's a general lack of this type of engineering talent, I feel, in terms of being able to find solutions builder that knows how to develop a solution set, identify the issues, and be able to digest data in a way that is much more practical in a sense. So let me give you some examples. Your traditional industrial engineering courses, and I came out of them myself, is usually always focused around, here's a data set, please go optimize it. Or, we've crunched this data, you may at most need to do a little cleaning, but then run it through some algorithms that you can build out. But in actuality, what you see in the field is you don't have the data set. And even if you manage to deploy some sensors to collect data or manually collect the data is not clean. So where is that being taught in schools? How do you go out and find solution sets to collect data, clean data, and then eventually process data? These are skill sets that, unfortunately, a lot of universities, and this is not just Singapore alone, everywhere, does not have those proper skill sets in place. It's kind of the true engineering ingenuity there, where you're going to go out and find and develop a unique solution to capture that information. IoT and industrial IoT, at the end of the day, what Arcstone deems that it is, it provides visibility. Gives you real-time visibility through data. But that's always a tricky thing. There's 1,000,001 devices available with 1,000,001 different solutions that you can deploy. So what do you do? What's going to be the most cost-effective? How do you go about identifying that? Those, I think, are pretty critical skill sets, and pairing that with your typical, what you call the data scientists that will be coming out. There needs to be a merge. You can't just have a massive amount of data scientists come out that have no clue in terms of the engineering of how to actually deploy a solution to collect any data. There's no one there with the textbook giving you all the data to go and optimize. So these type of skill sets that blend that kind of like MacGyver concept, since we're going on all this US terminology here, is how do you get people to cobble together solution sets at the beginning to give you that data? And I think a lot of this training needs to start moving into the universities. And it's not easy to teach. It's a lot about where the test beds come into a lot of play. The university here, I think Singapore has made a tremendous move in opening up labs inside of schools, inside of the polytechnics, inside of the major universities that allow you to go and tinker with machinery, tinker with devices, find out which sensors work, build your own sensors. Those are critical skill sets and talents that needs to start moving forward, not just people that can crunch algorithms, because at the end of the day, that's just, you can only do that when you have the data. So this move, I think, again, when we see Singapore moving in this direction, I think there's a lot of positive momentum going here. So I think in the next couple of years, the hope is that with this combination of skill sets, this hybridization of the engineering talent and the data scientist talents that are being merged together, can really start making a huge difference, at least from the Singapore side.
You want to add something?
Could I just add to
Sure.
that? Because I think sensor data also can be very dirty. Shipping, for example, algae collects on data, sensors. And the actual data scientist's view of it is it's 50-60% of the time you're actually cleaning data and organizing it. I think I'd add one more set of people to the engineers and the data scientists, and that's to your point around you need to know what problem you're solving. So you need to be aware of your domain, be it manufacturing or shipping or logistics. And part of the integral issue with regards to data, which we're going to explore in the next section, is that you need to know which 1% of that data is actually going to be useful for making decisions and actions based on. Because data doesn't actually equal information or insight. And so knowing which areas will affect your industrial IoT area is very critical, and therefore you have to have, not just MacGyver, you almost have to have both sides of the brain, the analytics side and the creative side working together. That's very challenging, so hence communities get together. One of my mentors said, you learn by your mistakes. However, learn by other people's mistakes is a lot easier. So don't try and learn everything. There's a lot of resources out there, government, other startups, mentors, and industry associations that can actually help you bootstrap and move on.
Thanks. I think there's time for one more question. Let's take the second one, which has 4 votes. It's a pretty long one. Yeah? As we move towards greater digitization, this is easier to read. Creating apps for functions as simple as switching on lights, are we reaching a point where apps are created to appear modern and relevant instead of being effective? So is it that, there are too many apps which are coming up? Maybe the person who has put up this question,
I think if you're referring to the smart toothbrush, then yes, there's too many apps in that area, not enough in the industrial setting. Let's focus on more of the...
Yeah, so I think
So
probably there
interpret the
are too many apps which are coming up rather than those which are actually relevant or maybe important in terms of business applications. I mean, that's what I get from this.
If what you're trying to say is, if what you're trying to ask is, are there opportunities in business-oriented applications and industrial-oriented applications? The answer is yes. I could talk a little longer, but the answer is still yes.
Maybe give
Yeah, and I guess if anyone's seen the Philips laboratories here, they'll find out that actually lighting and applications for that is real industrial benefits in terms of environmental aspects, energy savings, and so on. But also the lights that I've seen in the Philips area, for example, just recently, actually have an IP address to them. And they also have sensors which can sense whether or not someone's actually in the room at the same time. So there's dual use for those things. So some apps, yes, are very trivial. And some apps are not built with the industrial strength that perhaps we need to take a look at. But there are still use cases there which, if not trivial and designed correctly, can offer big value.
So one final question. Which industries, and I think it's coming from one of the other questions over there, which industries do you think will digitize the first?
Definitely digital toothbrush. No question. I mean, I think we're all moving to digital toothbrushes now. Fortunately, I only have 10 teeth, so digital is perfectly fine. No. Very clearly, manufacturing and production. That's where we're seeing, it's where 40% of our test beds are focused. It's where it's the entire focus of Industry 4.0 in Germany. It's definitely the focus of Internet 2025 in China. So I think I have to point at manufacturing and production. I certainly know that you're going to say the same thing.
So you would say more of the discrete production areas. And you see similar trends here in Southeast Asia?
Oh, absolutely. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Okay, so I mean, we have run out of time. Any final question you want to take? Do we still have time for one more? I can't see it, so I'm trying to figure out who's...
On the subject of the toothbrush, doesn't Philips make that?
Yeah. Okay, so I
Don't
get a
they
signal
have
that we have kind of run out of time. So from all of you and on my behalf as well, I really want to thank this panel. I think we did have some very interesting conversation. And thank you very much for being here and sharing your thoughts. Thanks again.